Alrighty, we are going to move now on to the wide receiver position, talking about those mid-round guys that blow up last year. Mike Evans was a round 6-7 pick that ended up being in the top 5 of advance rates, and you're liking one of his teammates this year, wide receiver Chris Godwin. Why is he your mid-round receiver target that you're loving?
Yeah, so he's not necessarily the archetype of like a player that we're looking for in terms of a blow up, just because he's done it before. But it's hard for me just not to pass up on this value. So let's take a look back at Chris Godwin's performances in the last 5 seasons, going back starting with 2019, which was his true breakout season, just in terms of his finishes and fantasy points per game. 2019 moving forward, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 15, wide receiver 7, wide receiver 15, and then wide receiver 34. So last season was clearly his worst season in recent memory, the last 5 years. 12.3 fantasy points per game, and like I mentioned, wide receiver 34. And this can be attributed to a couple of different things, but the one aspect of his game that really took a hit last year was his slot usage. It was the lowest that it's been in years. He was only running 32% of his routes out of the slot. But this season, we don't have Dave Canales running the show. We all love Dave Canales, the QB whisperer. We love the role that he gave Rachaad White, but his presence in Tampa Bay last year with the Bucs really hampered Chris Godwin. So we've got Liam Cohen brought in as the new Bucs offensive coordinator, and here's just a quick quote that he gave just about 2 weeks ago on Godwin and how they want to use him. So he says, then you've got a guy like Chris that I think can be a really dynamic player on the inside. That's where I envision him playing. Is more on the inside, playing that F position, ultimately like Cooper did. Cooper Kupp is who he's referencing to. Liam Cohen was the assistant wide receivers coach when Cooper Kupp had his breakout year just a couple of years ago. A lot of things run through that, so I'm excited about him, referring to Chris Godwin. So we're already seeing quotes out of the Bucs OC saying they want him to get him in the slot, play a similar role to what Cooper Kupp did for the Rams, which is, I don't want to look too much into that, but that's just incredibly exciting on its own. And then we have let's look at another quote from Scott Smith, a Bucs beat reporter, just talking about Godwin's slot usage and his success as a slot receiver. So this is about his usage in the slot. He was there 51% of snaps in 2020, 53% in 2021, 60% in 2022. Throwing the plays, which Godwin was lined up tight with the line, often to take advantage of his blocking abilities. And now those 3-year percentages are 67%, 70%, and 72%. During those 3 seasons, Godwin ranked 5th in the NFL in receptions per game, 6.5, and 9th in receiving yards per game, 72.3. Godwin also had exceptional catch rates, hauling in 77.4% of his targets in 2020, 77.2 in 2021, and 73.2 in 2022. So his slot rate took a massive hit, and then so did his production. His catch rate was way down. His overall production line was way down. So like I mentioned before, his slot usage was just 32% last year, and in the years prior, we saw him hovering between 50 and 60%. So I think there's a pretty clear correlation. I mean, you just see his overall number of raw receptions went down. He was usually hovering around 100 receptions a year, but last season only 83 receptions. So it's just his usage in the slot. He gets a lot of those layup targets that we always talk about absolutely loving. So I expect if he's going to be back in the slot, just a higher catch rate leading to a higher overall number of receptions for Godwin. So this is just a different role that I expect Godwin to be in versus what he was last year. And he's being drafted as a wide receiver 41, which I think he's just a player being drafted lower than his floor, to be honest. We saw him do absolutely terribly last year in terms of what we're used to seeing out of Chris Godwin. And he was still the wide receiver 34 in points per game, now being drafted as the wide receiver 41. If we see him bump back into the slot, I fully expect him to be, because this is exactly what we're hearing out of the Bucs' new offensive coordinator. So with him back in the slot, I expect to see a higher catch rate, higher overall number of receptions. So I think this is just all setting up for Chris Godwin to return to the Chris Godwin that we've known for years and we've absolutely loved in fantasy.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the wide receiver 2, 15, 6, and 14 in points per game. The Chris Godwin we know and love when he was using that slot role. Now back in it, this year's potential Cooper Kupp and usage, that got me pretty excited and perked up with those layup targets. He's perfect for that mold, that type of role. So if he's used to his absolute perfection skill set, I'm all about this one. I've not been getting enough of Chris Godwin, apparently, given that take, and I absolutely love it. What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments. Check out some more videos. and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.